Canada's prehistoric record has been rewritten more times in the last 50 years than in the previous 2 centuries. Every decade, something turns up that contradicts what the textbook said was possible. A site too old, a structure too sophisticated, a trade network too vast, a location too remote. The 15 places on this list are not fringe theories. They are documented, peer-reviewed, and officially recognized. They are also deeply inconvenient for the simple stories we have told ourselves about who was here, when, and what they were capable of building. Each one exists, but shouldn't. Here they are. Number 15. Pre-Dorset stone tent rings, Ellesmere Island, Nunavut. The northern tip of Ellesmere Island sits approximately 700 kilometers from the geographic North Pole. It is one of the most extreme environments on Earth, with months of continuous darkness, temperatures that can reach negative 50 degrees Celsius, and a landscape that is essentially Arctic desert. And yet, on the gravel terraces of this island, archaeologists have found the stone tent rings of the pre-Dorset people. Ancient Paleo-Eskimo cultures who arrived on Ellesmere Island approximately 4,000 years ago. The rings are small and circular, formed by stones placed around the base of animal skin tents to hold the edges against the ground in wind. They are unambiguous evidence that human beings chose to live in one of the most hostile environments the planet offers, built shelters there using nothing but stone and skin, and sustained themselves, hunting muskox and ringed seal in the perpetual cold for generations. They are the northernmost prehistoric human structures ever found. And the question they raise is not academic, it is existential. Why would anyone go there? The answer is that pre-contact peoples moved into every available ecological niche on the continent with an efficiency and resilience that modern civilization cannot replicate. And they did it 4,000 years before any outside world knew they existed. Number 14. Charlie Lake Cave, British Columbia. Near Fort St. John in northeastern British Columbia, a limestone cave sits above Charlie Lake. Inside and directly outside its entrance, archaeologists excavating in the 1970s and 1980s found something that stopped the dig. 2 ravens had been buried here, not discarded, not eaten, buried separately with deliberate placement, roughly 1,000 years apart. The first raven dates to approximately 10,500 years ago. The second was deposited approximately 1,000 years later by a different group of people who had no way of knowing the first burial was there, yet chose the same sacred spot. The bison bones in the waste pit outside the entrance dated to 12,000 years ago, making this one of the earliest confirmed human occupation sites in British Columbia. But it is the ravens that matter. No food value, no practical purpose, no accident, intentional ritual burial of birds in a specific location, repeated across a millennium by separate groups. Archaeologists have called this possibly the earliest evidence of ritual behavior on the entire North American continent. A small cave above a lake in northern British Columbia, used as a ceremonial site 12,000 years ago by people whose name we do not know, for a purpose we cannot fully reconstruct. The structure is the act of return itself, encoded in 2 birds. Number 13. Tabor Hill Ossuary, Scarborough, Ontario. In 1956, during construction of a housing development in what is now the Scarborough district of Toronto, workers found bones. Archaeologists were called. Walter Kenyon, assistant curator of ethnology at the Royal Ontario Museum, supervised the excavation and found himself looking at the deepest ossuary he had ever encountered in his career. The pit contained the remains of more than 500 individuals, men, women, and children of the Wendat people, buried together in a communal bone pit during a ceremony known as the Feast of the Dead, which the Wendat conducted approximately every 10 years. Bodies buried across the community were exhumed, their bones cleaned and wrapped in beaver pelts, and the whole community gathered to place them together in a large communal pit. The pit was then sealed, and the cycle of death and remembrance began again. Kenyon called it the most significant ethnological discovery in Canada's history. The site is in a residential neighborhood in one of Canada's largest cities. A brass plaque and a small fenced area mark where more than 500 people were buried with ceremony and intention in the 14th century. The structure beneath the lawn of suburban Toronto is a monument to a funerary tradition of extraordinary communal sophistication. It sits under the sidewalks of a neighborhood most Torontonians drive past without knowing it exists. Number 12. Thule whale bone houses, Nunavut. Approximately 1,000 years ago, the ancestors of the modern Inuit, a culture archaeologists call the Thule, swept eastward from Alaska across the entire Canadian Arctic in what was probably the fastest large-scale migration in North American prehistory, reaching Greenland within a century or two of leaving Alaska. They did this in pursuit of bowhead whales, and when they settled, they built their winter houses using the bodies of those whales as structural material. The jawbones of bowhead whales, animals that can exceed 15 meters in length and weigh 100 tons, were used as roof rafters and entrance tunnel supports. Whale vertebrae became flooring. Ribs were used as walls. The result was a semi-subterranean winter house half buried in the ground for insulation, entered through a cold trap tunnel that prevented warm air from escaping, and roofed with whalebone covered in sod. 2 small oil lamps burning seal fat heated the interior. Archaeologists excavating these structures at sites across Nunavut, including on Cornwallis Island and Bathurst Island, have found them remarkably preserved by permafrost, the whalebone still in place after 10 centuries. A structure built from the largest animal on Earth, without metal tools, in one of the harshest climates the planet offers, that kept families warm through Arctic winters for generations. That shouldn't be possible by any reasonable assessment of what was achievable under those conditions. It happened, and the structures are still there. Number 11. Drop 45 Drive Lane, Lake Huron. 9,000 years ago, there was no Lake Huron. Where the lake now sits, while a broad limestone ridge connected what is now northeastern Michigan to southern Ontario, a corridor of open land used by caribou herds during their seasonal migrations. The people who hunted those caribou built stone structures on that ridge to intercept them. 2 parallel lines of stones leading toward a funnel with circular hunting blinds built into the stone walls. Then the Ice Age ended, sea levels rose, and the ridge went underwater. The structures sank with it. 9,000 years of submersion preserved them perfectly, sealed from any further human disturbance, waiting on the floor of Lake Huron at a depth of 37 meters until a team of underwater archaeologists from the University of Michigan found them in 2014 using sonar and published their findings in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The Drop 45 Drive Lane is the most complex prehistoric hunting structure ever found beneath the Great Lakes. Its stone tool debris confirmed intentional human construction. It is twice as old as Stonehenge. It sits under the water of one of the most industrialized lake systems on Earth, completely unchanged since the day the water rose over it. No museum holds it. No tourist visits it. It waits, precisely as it was left, 37 meters below the surface. Number 10. Dorset/Tuniat Stone Longhouses, Canadian Arctic. Before the Inuit, there was another people. Archaeologists call them the Dorset culture. The Inuit who came after them call them Tuniat and describe them in oral history as giants, enormously strong, somewhat fearful of conflict, easily displaced. Between approximately 500 BCE and 1000 to 1500 CE, the Dorset people occupied the Canadian Arctic from Labrador to Baffin Island to the high Arctic islands. They built structures unlike anything associated with Arctic cultures before or since. Stone-outlined communal longhouses, elongated to dimensions of 5 to 7 meters wide and up to 45 meters long, used as warm-season gathering places, their stone outlines still visible on the Arctic tundra today. Then, somewhere between 1000 and 1500 CE, the Dorset vanished. Not integrated, not absorbed, vanished. DNA analysis, published by multiple research teams, has confirmed that there is no genetic connection between the Dorset people and the Thule Inuit who replaced them, or with any modern population. They were a completely separate lineage that occupied the Arctic for 2,000 years. Built communal structures on a scale that challenges everything we assume about Arctic prehistory, and then disappeared without leaving a biological trace. What happened is genuinely unknown. The stone outlines of their longhouses still mark the tundra. The people who built them left nothing but the stones. Number 9. Moose Mountain, Medicine Wheel, Saskatchewan. In southeastern Saskatchewan, on a high point of land accessible only by traveling across open prairie, a stone structure has been sitting for approximately 2,600 years. It consists of a central cairn, an outer ring about 9 meters in diameter, and 5 stone spokes radiating outward, with one spoke extended dramatically further than the others, reaching 37 meters from the center and pointing precisely toward the spot on the horizon where the sun rises on the summer solstice. In the 1970s, astronomer John Eddy studied the sightlines created by the structure's cairns and found that other alignments point toward the exact positions on the horizon where the bright stars Fomalhaut, Aldebaran, Rigel, and Sirius first appear, before dawn on specific dates. The so-called heliacal risings used in ancient astronomical calendars across cultures worldwide. Those 4 stars, along with the solstice alignment, would have functioned as a precise calendar for tracking seasons and coordinating ceremonial cycles. A stone structure in the Saskatchewan prairie, built 2,600 years ago, aligned to the summer solstice and 4 specific stars, so precisely that the alignments are still accurate today. It was first recorded in writing in 1895. Almost no one outside Saskatchewan knows it exists. Number 8. Serpent Mounds, Ontario. On the north shore of Rice Lake near Peterborough, Ontario, a sinuous earthen structure about 60 meters long and 8 meters wide rises from the landscape in the shape of a serpent. It is the only known effigy mound in Canada, a mound built in the deliberate shape of an animal or spirit form, and it was constructed not in one act but gradually between approximately 50 BCE and 300 CE by the Point Peninsula culture of the Middle Woodland period. The mound itself is remarkable. What is inside it is more remarkable still. The graves contain objects that have no business being in central Ontario: marine shells from the Gulf of Mexico, obsidian traceable to the Yellowstone region of what is now Wyoming, and copper objects mined from the Lake Superior Basin. These materials traveled hundreds to thousands of kilometers to be buried with the dead in a snake-shaped earthwork on the shore of a lake in Ontario. The trade networks implied by these grave goods, networks connecting the people of inland Ontario to the Gulf Coast, the Rocky Mountain interior, and the Great Lakes copper sources operated 2,000 years ago with a geographic reach that most people assume only came with modern transportation. A serpent-shaped mound in Ontario, connecting three distant worlds, built by people whose name we do not know, for reasons the objects inside suggest were profoundly important. The park that contains it was closed to the public in 2009. Number 7. Majorville Medicine Wheel / Umuk, Alberta. On a grassy hill overlooking the Bow River, about 70 kilometers east of Calgary, a stone structure sits that almost no one outside Alberta knows about. Despite being older than Stonehenge, older than the Egyptian pyramids, and, in the assessment of multiple archaeologists, one of the most extraordinary prehistoric structures on the North American continent. The Blackfoot name for it is Umuk, Old Big. Archaeologists call it the Majorville Cairn and Medicine Wheel. It consists of a central cairn 9 meters in diameter, connected by 28 stone spokes to an outer cobble circle 27 meters across. The central cairn was built in what researchers call accretional domes. Each generation added more stones on top. And when the southern half was excavated in 1977, archaeologists recovered more than 17,000 artifacts, with projectile points at the deepest layers dating the structure's initial construction to approximately 3,200 BCE, making it 5,200 years old. The Stonehenge construction in England, for comparison, began around 3000 BCE. The Great Pyramid at Giza was completed around 2560 BCE. The people who started building Umuk on a hill in southern Alberta were doing so before either monument existed. The cairn continued to be added to, visited, and used for over 4,000 years, until European contact disrupted the tradition. Today, offerings of sweetgrass, sage, willow, and tobacco are still left at the site. The structure on the hill is not dead. It is still in use. Number 6. Rama Chert Quarries, Torngat Mountains, Labrador. In the Torngat Mountains of northernmost Labrador, along a 40-kilometer stretch of cliff face inside what is now Torngat Mountains National Park, lies a rock formation that holds one of the most revealing industrial and trade sites in Canadian prehistoric history. The rock is called Rama Chert, a translucent, banded, gray-white stone that takes an exceptionally sharp edge and can be worked into precise tools. It exists nowhere else on Earth, and for approximately 4,400 years, beginning around 3000 BCE, ancient peoples of at least 5 distinct cultures made the journey to these remote quarries along a coastline Parks Canada describes as among the most forbidding in the Northern Hemisphere, to extract the stone and carry it home. Objects made from Rama Chert have been found at archaeological sites along the entire length of the Labrador coast, in Quebec, in Newfoundland, in the Maritime Provinces, in Maine, as far south as Maryland, as far west as Peterborough, Ontario, and one piece during archaeological excavations at the Norse settlement of Sandnes in Greenland in 1935. A quarry site in remote northern Labrador continuously worked for 44 centuries, whose product was traded across a continent and reached a Norse settlement. The trade network it documents operated without wheels, without written records, and without any of the infrastructure modern economics considers essential. The quarries are a National Historic Site of Canada. Most Canadians have never heard of them. Number 5. L'Anse Amour Burial Mound, Labrador. On the shore of the Strait of Belle Isle in southern Labrador, standing behind a pull-off on Route 510 that most travelers drive past without stopping, is a low, circular mound of large stones about 8 to 10 meters in diameter. It looks like a natural pile. It is not. Inside, under the stones, is a small stone-lined burial chamber. Under that chamber, buried 1.5 meters deep in a large pit, is the skeleton of an adolescent child who died approximately 7,500 years ago. The body was placed face down, head pointed west, covered in red ochre, wrapped in skins or birch bark. Ceremonial fires were lit on either side. Placed alongside the child were stone and bone spearheads, a walrus tusk, painted stones, a bone whistle, and a toggling harpoon head. The oldest toggling harpoon ever found anywhere in the world, predating the next oldest known example by thousands of years. The mound of stones built over this chamber to mark the grave is the oldest known funeral monument in North America. It predates Stonehenge by roughly 2,500 years. The maritime archaic people who built it were not supposed to have this level of ceremonial complexity, this degree of intentional funerary architecture, this understanding of symbolic burial practice. The structure they built on the Labrador shore says otherwise. The Labrador Straits Museum in L'Anse-aux-Loups holds replicas of the artifacts. The originals are at the Rooms in St. John's. The mound is still there, on the side of the road, mostly unmarked. Number 4. Triquet Island Village, British Columbia. The Heiltsuk Nation's oral history describes a strip of land on the central BC coast that remained ice-free during the last ice age, a place of refuge where their ancestors survived when glaciers covered everything else and the sea froze. For generations, this story was received the way oral histories often are, politely, with the unspoken understanding that it was myth, not evidence. In 2016, a team of archaeologists from the University of Victoria and the Hakai Institute, working with Heiltsuk community members, excavated a site on Triquet Island on the BC Central Coast. Approximately 2.5 meters below the surface, they found flakes of charcoal from an ancient hearth. The charcoal dated to 14,000 years ago. The site is 3 times older than the Egyptian pyramids. It is one of the oldest repeatedly occupied settlements found in North America. Spears, fishing hooks, and fire lighting tools were recovered from the deeper layers. The village site, a physical structure built on a specific patch of coastline, because that coastline was habitable when everywhere else was locked in ice, validated precisely what the Heiltsuk oral history had described. A village that shouldn't exist by the conventional migration theory, which held that the earliest Americans arrived inland via a corridor between ice sheets. Triquet Island says they also came by sea. The village was already there on the coast, waiting. Number 3. Calvert Island, Hearth and Footprints, British Columbia. In 2014, archaeologist Duncan McLaren of the Hakai Institute and University of Victoria was excavating the intertidal beach sediments on Calvert Island, off BC's central coast, looking for deposits from when sea levels were 2 to 3 meters lower at the end of the last ice age. About 60 centimeters below the sandy surface, his team found gray clay deposits, and in those deposits, pressed into the clay with the same clarity as a child's footprint in fresh cement, human footprints. 29 of them, and they belong to at least 3 people, 2 adults and a child, all barefoot. Nearby, within the same deposit, was a stone-ringed hearth, a campfire site built from rocks arranged deliberately around a fire, the ash and charcoal preserved inside. Radiocarbon dating of wood found in the clay sediment placed the footprints in the hearth at between 13,317 and 12,633 years old. Three people arrived on this beach 13,000 years ago, stopped, built a fire in a ring of stones, and stood long enough to leave impressions in the clay. The prints were preserved by a layer of coarse sand deposited over them, sealing them for 13,000 years until the tide exposed the edge of the deposit and McLaren's team knew where to dig. The hearth is a structure. The footprints are the people who built it. And both of them prove that when the standard theory said only the inland ice-free corridor existed as a migration route, families were building campfires on the coast of British Columbia. Number 2. Bluefish Caves, Yukon. 34 kilometers southwest of the Vuntut Gwich'in community of Old Crow in northern Yukon, 3 small limestone caves sit in the Kile Range. None of them is larger than a room. Combined, they hold less than 100 cubic meters of interior space. Between 1977 and 1987, archaeologist Jacques Cinq-Mars excavated them under the direction of the Archaeological Survey of Canada and began finding things that contradicted a half-century of scientific consensus about when humans first arrived in North America. The consensus was that people arrived around 14,000 years ago via a land bridge from Siberia and spread inland. But what Cinq-Mars found were bones of mammoths, Yukon horses, caribou, and bison that bore cut marks made by stone tools. He submitted his results. The results were rejected. The dates did not fit. His findings were largely dismissed for decades because they placed human activity in Beringia at 24,000 years ago, not 14,000, and no theory could accommodate that. In 2017, researchers at the University of Montreal reanalyzed the bone assemblage under taphonomic scrutiny, confirmed the cut marks were anthropogenic, and published their findings in PLOS 1, with radiocarbon dates confirming human occupation as early as 24,000 years before present. The Bluefish Caves are the oldest confirmed archaeological site in North America by a margin of roughly 10,000 years. They predate the last glacial maximum. They hold evidence of people sheltering in rock cavities in Yukon while most of the continent was under ice. Those 3 small caves, dismissed for decades, rewrote the story of when people first arrived on this continent. The structures are barely caves. The story they contain is the oldest human story on the continent. Number 1. Namu Hunter-Gatherer Cemetery, British Columbia. On the BC Central Coast, accessible only by water, a place called Namu has been occupied by human beings for nearly 10,000 continuous years. Marine hunters first arrived here approximately 9,700 years ago, not long after the ice retreated, and the site has been used, revisited, and built upon in every subsequent era by at least 6 identifiable cultural periods, right through to the historic Heiltsuk, who fished the waters here into the 20th century. The shell midden at Namu is 9 meters deep, an accumulated architectural record of 10 millennia of return. But it is not the midden that earns Namu the top position on this list. It is what was found in it in approximately 3,400 BCE, a cemetery. Not a single burial, not an accident, a structured, intentional burial ground used repeatedly at a site where the same people kept coming back for millennia. Hunter-gatherer societies are not supposed to have cemeteries. The standard model of mobile foraging cultures holds that they move too frequently to maintain permanent burial grounds, that sedentism and cemeteries go together and require agriculture to sustain. Namu had neither agriculture nor sedentism in the conventional sense. What it had was a place so productive, so reliably abundant with salmon, sea mammals, and shellfish, and that generation after generation returned to exactly this spot, buried their dead here, built their fires here, and left the evidence of 10,000 years of belonging layered in the ground like pages. A cemetery is a statement about place. It says, "We will come back." The people of Namu made that statement in 3400 BCE, and every generation that followed kept the promise. The structure that shouldn't exist is not the midden and not the burial ground. It is the unbroken chain of return itself, documented in 9 meters of earth, on a coast most of Canada has never seen. What these 15 places share is not mystery in the theatrical sense. None of them involves unexplained forces or impossible engineering. All of them involve people doing exactly what people do: building shelters, burying their dead, trading for what they needed, and tracking the stars to know when to move. The reason these structures shouldn't exist is not that they are supernatural. It is that for a long time, the dominant narrative of North American prehistory underestimated everyone who was here before European contact: their age, their range, their sophistication, and their ambition. Every entry on this list is a correction to that underestimate, and every year more corrections are found. Subscribe below, leave a comment with the entry that hit you hardest, and share this with someone who still thinks prehistoric Canada was mostly empty.